You guys, I'm so excited about today's guest on the show. She's funny, wicked smart, and so very down to earth. Those qualities have made her a favorite among podcast listeners and readers, and her insights on why our middle years of adulthood matter significantly will have you celebrating your birthdays instead of dreading them. She's Lisa Jo Baker. I'm Julie Lyles Carr, and you're listening to the Modern Motherhood Podcast from AllMomDoes. Lisa Jo, thanks so much for joining us.
Julie, I'm so happy to be with you today.
So catch our listeners up on where you are, what you do, where you live, who lives in your house, all that.
I'll try and give you like the 2-minute version of that. So we live just outside of Washington, D.C. in the Baltimore area. I have 3, what I like to affectionately say, of the loudest children you've ever met in your life. I don't understand that. I see parents with calm and lovely children who know how to regulate their decibel levels, and mine seem not able to do that. For another lifetime ago, I was an attorney who practiced human rights law, but for the last decade, I've been a writer. And it's funny because on the one hand, when I was a lawyer, I was advocating on behalf of women, and I feel like as a writer, that is what I'm continuing to do, to advocate on behalf of women. And so, when I was a mom of littles, that's a lot of what I spent time doing, encouraging us through the sleep-deprived years. But now, as we enter this middle ground where we seem to carry our children not so much in our hips, but more kind of deep in our heart, and in our worry lines and in the extra pounds we've acquired over the years, I've arrived here at the middle, and that is the part of my life I'm unpacking now, I guess, in public by writing about it and asking other women, what's it been like for you? Because it hasn't been exactly what I thought it would be. So that's what I do. I spend my days writing and podcasting and really a lot of the time chauffeuring preteens and teenagers to sport practices.
I did tell my parents at one point, I said, thank you so much for the college education. Really appreciate it. Actually, as it turns out, what has been most valuable was the driver's ed, because I am spending my life driving children to places.
I honestly one day timed how much time I was in the car, and I think I spent over 6 hours one day. I'm like, I could have driven to a beach destination, and instead I've just driven back and forth to soccer practices and football practices today.
But you tap into something that I think is really important. When I was little, I always thought about, what it's going to be like to be a grown-up. Because being a grown-up to me, you could stay up as late as you wanted. That was a big deal. I was a non-sleeper back in the day. You could watch whatever you wanted on television as long as you wanted. You could go places. You could wear what you wanted. In my mind, my Southern mother raising me in Southern California and all of her rules about when I could wear white and when I could wear sandals and I couldn't, and on and on and on, that made no sense in Southern California. I thought, now I'm a grown-up, I'm just going to wear white jeans all the time, which actually I have done that as an adult. But then we sort of launch into what adulting really looks like, and it can look far different. So when did you begin to go,
Right. Well, first of all, you sound just like my teenage son, who constantly is telling me it must be so great to be a grown-up mom. I can't wait till I can make the rules about what I can watch and how long I can be on a device. Is it just so awesome? And then my preteen asks the same. Is it so great to be a grown-up mom? And for some of the reasons you mentioned, yes, sure, I do like that I can make those decisions about staying up late if I want to. But you know what? There's got to be consequences the next morning. Same goes for my binge eating while I'm watching Netflix. I looked at my 13-year-old son yesterday and said, to have your metabolism, as he was downing his mega cheese, bacon, hamburger, and side of curly fries after soccer. But yeah, for me, it really was so much of adulthood first feels like getting married and having kids, right? But that season is very, very intense, especially with little kids. But when you climb out of bed one morning and realize you slept through the night, you don't feel exhausted anymore. But now you have teenagers you're in charge of, and you don't know how to change the air filter in your house. That hit me so strongly. And I know for different people, it's not really a matter of age. I really do think it's the season that you're passing through. So you might be younger when that season hits you. You might be older. For me, it's really aligned with my 40s, where I've arrived, where I have a career. I have now teenagers. I have a house. I have a mortgage. I'm supposed to plan for retirement. And suddenly I wondered, how am I in charge of this? Where's the grown-up? And I kept thinking, I really did believe I would arrive at a point in my life where I felt like a grown-up. And what's been surprising to me is to be in my 40s and in charge of all of these things and still feel like a lot of the days I'm faking it. And that has been something that's been hard to wrap my mind around. but it's been interesting to hear how many other, not just women, like how many other people feel the same.
Absolutely. You tap into something that I think is really germane to this conversation because of the way our culture has now positioned how we look at ages and stages. And sometimes we'll kick this around, well, the elderly are not as venerated as they are in other cultures. And I think that's a real thing. But I think we have come to this place where we have so elevated those years of high school and college and those early years of romance, getting the career started in babies, that in some ways, I feel like almost as a culture, we say that you peak when you're 18, 19, 20 years old, and then it's just all downhill. I've had good friends that were all the things in high school. Now, Lisa Jo, I know this is going to shock you, but I was a pariah in high school. So I did not peak in high school. There was no, I was a peak geek, but there was no peaking. But I am married to somebody who was all the things in high school. I've had dear, dear friends who were all the things in high school and college and voted to every, class president and homecoming queen of this and lead cheerleader of that. And this season of the middle has been very hard for them because all of that anticipation, all of that glory, all of that dreaming seems like it just got stopped. Do you see that as a culture that we are elevating some of those early years, maybe out of proportion?
Yeah, I mean, look at the slew of Netflix romantic comedies now are not people in their 30s and 40s. They're high schoolers, right? Mm-hmm. Like that's the genre that's being produced over and over and over again. And sure, I like to watch them as much as the next person, but I find I'm rooting for the grownups. Like I'm rooting for the parents in those movies. I'm like, those poor parents, what is wrong with those kids? Let them respect their parents better. But yes, look at the viral videos, the YouTube promposals, the moment of, the engagement moment where it has to be perfectly captured with the perfect lighting. And I look at that and I think, my gosh, I wouldn't go back to that for anything. I would not go back to the beginning because they have no idea what's ahead of them still. Thank you, Jesus, that I have 20 years of marriage under my belt. I have survived it because I understand, much in the same way that I used to think, being pregnant, that's the pinnacle. That's what you're going for when you want to be a mom. Nobody told me, no. It's once the baby gets here. Like that's when you're going to have to really dive into motherhood. I think it's the same for life. And so much of our culture glorifies these peak moments, these mountaintop accomplishments. But nobody lives there. Like most of us just have to figure out how to make chicken again tonight. Right. What do you do with the hundreds and hundreds of completely ordinary days? If those don't count, what are we telling ourselves? Like, what are we telling our kids? And so for me, I have spent, when this started for me, what crystallized this revelation, I saw an internet article probably 5 years ago now, and Huffington Post does these quotes of the week. And it was the teenager quote of the week. And this teenager had said, and I quote, "My life will never be fulfilled until someone runs through an airport to stop me getting on a plane." Ooh. Which we all understand that trope, right? You've seen it 100 movies. You think that is the pinnacle of love? Like that's what love looks like? And I couldn't shake it. I kept thinking about it. And at that point, I had 3 kids. I had a husband who's been there through the battle cry of birth with me 3 different times, who's cleaned up more puke than I thought a baby could possibly produce from their body. And I thought to myself, no, they've got it wrong. Ordinary is sexy. The man who stays is sexy. The man who drives the minivan with the broken air conditioning so that you don't have to, that is hot, man. And I really believe that. And I thought, my word, somebody has to remind the rest of us that this is where our lives really live. The movie credits roll at the end of the romantic comedy, and then we have to walk out of the theater back into our real lives where we forget that real love really lives. And it looks like that guy coming home late at night because he picked up a second job over the summer to pay for school. I mean, that is truly the heart of romance that I don't think we spend enough time celebrating.
Absolutely. It's interesting. I am addicted to, and I don't know why, but Everest documentaries. I don't have a desire to climb Everest. I'd love to see it one day.
Right.
Maybe from like a glamping kind of, tent or something.
Absolutely.
But one of the things I always find very compelling about Everest is the fact that you do all this to climb, you only get to stay for 15 minutes, maybe, or the peak experience will kill you. But the most dangerous part of climbing Everest is not the ascent, it's the descent.
Right.
And so when I think about these peak moments that we often talk about in life, it's sometimes really not how well you climb to get there and hang out and look at the view for 15 minutes. It's how well do you descend? How thoughtfully and intentionally do you hike back down in a way that's healthy and be able to go live out and tell the tale? Because that's where I think so many of us start to tumble down the hill at that point because we don't know how to function in the ordinary. So what are things that we can do to embrace the ordinary in a culture that's always about dream big, dream bigger, dream even bigger than that?
I know. Gosh, I love that analogy that you gave. I'm going to hold on to that. That's really powerful. I could not agree more because I think we live in a seize the day kind of culture, right? I mean, Everest is the perfect example of that. But most of us, like on boring Wednesday afternoons when the kid needs, his socks and cleats clean for soccer, I'm not having an Everest moment right now. I don't feel like seizing the day. I just want to survive the day. And I think for me, the key that has unlocked the secrets of the beauty and the highs of ordinary life has been not to seize the day, but to change the way I see the day. I think we spend a lot of time speeding past our days, speeding through our days. We're exhausted by our days. But every now and again, if you can slow down enough to pay attention, to actually see what's happening in this moment right now with those boys on that field who are trying out for soccer, and you are watching a battle of courage of kids who will fail, of kids who will have to go home and figure out how to live with that sense of not making the team, of your own son who might sit in the car and sob his eyes out because it didn't go how he wanted. That moment right there, you are living an Everest moment. You just don't know it because you didn't look. That is the biggest secret I have to offer to other women. It's the key that will unlock the magic in your completely ordinary days, changing the way you see them.
I'll be back with Lisa Jo in a hot minute. You are so appreciated, my friend. When I talk with our content coordinator, Rebecca Beckett, and with our producer, Donna Toti, we are just blown away by your response to the podcast, the way you tune in. And we want to make sure that we are bringing you the guests and content that encourage you in your life and who help give you the tools and information that help you grow in your parenting, your marriage, your work life, and your spiritual walk. So be sure and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts and get in touch with us at AllMomDoes on the socials and at AllMomDoes.com. We're pulling together new interviews and content for you, and we want to hear from you. So leave us your comments, your questions, and your suggestions when you head to AllMomDoes.com. I do think that when we talk about the romantic movies on Netflix or those kind of things, what is always so fascinating to me is the montage. For example, in the Hallmark Christmas movie, it is the ordinary moments. I mean,
let's skip right from.
Yes. It's the we're making cookies and throwing flour at each other. But those are pretty ordinary moments that we do, if we take a moment and reframe them, can find so much beauty and so much awe in it, because there is something awesome about doing the simplest things.
And I think that's where the word extraordinary comes from. It means extraordinary. Mm-hmm. And it's the subtitle of my book, Why That Extraordinary Life Looks Really Good on You, because I think that's what I've really committed to do, to try to spot the extra, because those are the moments that change you, and they change the narrative, who you are, who your family is, and what your expectations are together as a family. So yes, there really aren't ordinary lives. Everything is so extraordinary, what you are doing in this middle season of your life. And I think often, these are the stories one day we're going to sit around and tell each other. These are the stories we're going to remember. These are the stories that will line our empty nests one day. What we're living right now here in the boring, ordinary, extraordinary middle.
Why do you think that we sometimes dismiss those who are great at the ordinary? Because I do have friends who are able to walk in such contentment in their middle years, like they were just born for it. And I was born oldest child, pushed by a dad who was a real high achiever. I'm a high achiever, all those kind of things. And I think when you are that, you tend to be what I saw an author, I wish I could remember his name right now, but he talked about you're a time traveler. You're always living in the past, in former glories, or you're always living in the future, trying to decide what the next thing is that you're going to chase. And it's very hard for some of us to actually live in the today because we are these time travelers that go back and forth. So what do you see common in people's personalities, those who tend to be really good at soaking up and thoroughly enjoying the ordinary, and then those of us who have a really hard time just living in the hot minute we're in.
Julie, I think that's most of us, though. I think some of us on our good days are good at soaking in the moment, right? But I mean, I don't know that I or anyone can perfect that because, of course, we're built. Our DNA is to explore and to discover and to dream, and all of those are good things. I don't think they stop in the middle. I think the problem becomes when we start to feel disappointed by our middle and we start to feel dissatisfied and we look around at what the culture says a full life should be, and then we measure our ordinary against that. And in those moments when you start to feel that whisper of dissatisfaction, then I really believe that secret key of saying, wait, let me actually look at what happened today. Like, let me pay attention to it. Let me watch what's happening with my daughter as she sleeps and I sit next to her and I remember her stage fright that she overcame today. I do think that's the gift we get to give ourselves in the middle of the ordinary day. So I don't know that anyone has got it figured out 100%. I wish I did, because then I'd just be like, floating on sunshine through my days. And I'm not, and I feel annoyed when I'm doing laundry again. But I think what's helped me, especially as a writer, I find writing is a way of taking photographs for me. And I know those of us that are on Instagram love being able to capture those moments, these snapshots. And so my encouragement is to just get friends and women and fellow travelers through this season to just slow down and take those mental snapshots of right now. I'm up too late. My teenager should have finished his homework, but check this out. He's playing his new favorite song for me. Like, this moment right here, this is a photograph that I get to capture and take with me. So I think it's a struggle, right? All of us have to struggle through that, but at least we could remind ourselves, okay, there is a tool. There is something I can do in the midst of what feels completely ordinary to see it from a different perspective.
Success. Dirty word? Good word? How does it mess with our understanding of the extraordinary in our world?
I think it's an important word. I think we all think about it. I guess what's more important is the definition we ascribe to it, right? Like, what does success mean? If success means having 1 million followers on Instagram, or having a viral YouTube video, or having, X amount of money in the bank, or cars in the driveway, or a size house, well, that will be very difficult to live up to, and you will constantly be disappointed. But if you're able to think of success as a family that truly loves each other, that's present for each other, that champions each other, if you're able to understand success as a sense of fulfillment that doesn't come from external circumstances, but instead comes from a narrative we understand ourselves to be so significant in because of how God's created us, because of the people He's put in our lives, because of this incredible season we're walking through together, it looks very differently. I think failure is just as important a word. I think it's really significant. I think by here in the 40s, we've all experienced some significant failures. And I think what's important is not to be ashamed of them, but to figure out, how have they shaped me? What have they done to teach me? And how do I offer them to my kids as an understanding of who you are? But I'll end with this. I think beyond success or failure, the more important word is identity. Like, who am I? Because if I'm defined by my success or I'm defined by my failure, well, I'm in trouble, right? That's comes in and out with the tide. Those aren't things I can always control. And I think, especially as I'm raising teens now and a daughter, this idea of what success or failure means has to be trumped by my own sense of identity outside of those things. So for me, it's really in knowing who I am as a created image of a God who loves me, who's written a story for me, who has invited me into His day-to-day kingdom work. He's what I do here, whether I'm making chicken or I'm advocating for a law, for a woman who I'm trying to help return from human trafficking, or I'm writing a book. All of those are part of building God's kingdom. So in that deep sense of identity, there comes satisfaction, which I think is greater than success or failure. And I've spent quite a bit of time in these middle years actually sharing my failures with my children, much more than my success. My success doesn't teach them anything. It just teaches them, oh, yes, I should also shoot for the stars or be a YouTube star or whatever. Failure is a much, much better teacher, because I remember after Surprised by Motherhood came out, my first book, a few years later, one of my sons had a failure he was struggling with. And so I sat him down in front of the computer and I pulled up all of my 1-star book reviews, the worst ones, and I read all of them to him. He was so shocked, first of all, that people would say mean things about his mom, which I thought was very sweet. But secondly, that I would have them. And I said to him, Micah, listen to me. One day God's going to ask you to do something with your life. And you have to do it because God asked you to. Not because you want to be famous, not because you want to make $1 million, not because you want to please people. Because I promise you, some people won't like what you do. But that can't define who we are. It doesn't define the teams we try out for or how we feel about the grades we're getting. Our identity has to be locked into something more profound than success or failure.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that we do to ourselves that's unnecessary is we create arbitrary deadlines about the middle. If I have not accomplished this by this age, then that's it.
Yes, I failed the race.
I failed, completely. And I was reading something recently that was very compelling about a series of inventors and writers and playwrights and creatives and business leaders who did not realize those kinds of successes, the things that they became known for, until they were in their late 50s, 60s. One guy became a best-selling author in his 90s. So I think it really is interesting how we add these arbitrary expectations on ourselves that we must achieve thus and such by 45 or the gig's up.
I mean, I was so encouraged when I read that Madeleine L'Engle, her famous book, A Wrinkle in Time. I don't know if you know this, but it was rejected so many times. And then she received like her 13th rejection on her 40th birthday. Mm-hmm. And she said at that point, she just told her husband, it's over. It's over. I'm not going to be a writer. She said she dramatically covered up her typewriter. She put a blanket over her head. And she said she walked around her living room just wailing and crying and declaring her life over. And she said, but in that moment of failure, she was in her head, a part of her brain she realized was actually making up a story about a writer who kept getting rejected. And she said in that moment, she realized whether she was ever published or not, she is a writer. That is who she is. That is her identity, and nothing would stop her from writing. And so thank goodness, because the rest of us would be that much poorer. But yes, there's a richness in this time of our lives that's so powerful. How can an 18-year-old have glory days that could possibly compare to a 40-year-old who's lived through a kind of level of love and passion and loss and creativity and opportunity and success and failure? I mean, we are living at the marrow, the real marrow of our lives right now.
This middle, one of the things that is very surprising that sneaks up on you is in the last 5 years, I've lost my dad, my father-in-law, my mother-in-law. My mom's been diagnosed with dementia. And I think in these middle years, that moment you were talking about at the top of the interview, as we were cleaning out my mother-in-law's house and going through all of the things that follow, I had that moment that I looked at my husband and I said, we are now the grown-ups. Like, we're it. That is terrifying. Yes. How did we get here? And we feel like we were even younger than a lot of people walking through a lot of those transitions. Unfortunately, we lost all of them when they were in their mid to late 70s and had expected that we would have more years with them. Mm-hmm. So how do we begin to grapple with, in the midst of the middle, where we start seeing things come to fruition, some of them that feel ordinary, but are the fruit of the things that we longed for in our younger years, the house, the marriage, the kids, the career. And at the same time, we're also in that bridge that is having to say goodbye to those things that have been so important to the development of who we are now as the grown-ups, the people who are being left in charge.
Right. It's the strangest feeling, isn't it?
It is.
It is the strange period in our own lives. I felt like it's a crossing over, into, for ourselves, the second half of our lives, especially because then we see it because the people we love that are a generation ahead of us are crossing over that final journey, and it leaves us here. It has left me and a lot of friends I've talked with sort of a crisis of faith. Who am I? What's my identity? What am I supposed to do with the second half of my life? And it can just feel incredibly overwhelming. And so I don't have, a perfect solution to that. What I've done is just to lean into it, not to be afraid of those questions or those fears. And I think often in Western culture, we don't do a very good job about recognizing this season of crossing over from the first half to the second half of your life. In a lot of cultures, it's marked by more sort of meaningful celebrations or traditions that you go through. But here it's kind of like, we just talk about being over the hill.
Right.
There isn't really language. And Richard Rohr actually wrote a book recently called Falling Upward, where he talks about the second half of life and how really, if you look through like Greek literature and English literature, there are a lot of these journeys that you see characters go on to symbolize this second half of life. And then in a lot of cultures, that is the season where you become revered, right? You are the wise ones, the ones people look up to. And I just think there's space to reclaim that for ourselves, to lean into this season where we are now the grown-ups. And it's okay to feel like we don't know everything, like thank goodness. And we can tell our kids coming up behind us how confusing that can feel, but yet be willing to share with them what we've learned along the way. And I think a lot of us don't think of ourselves as mentors. We think we're unqualified or we're too young or too inexperienced. But man, I think if more of us would lean into that and be willing to just share who we are and what we've learned with the generation coming up behind us, I think that is part of what helps us realize we have learned some things. It's when you start to share it, right? When you look backwards, looking forward can be really daunting, but looking back, you start to realize, oh, I may know a few more things than the 18-year-olds in the Netflix comedies.
I've had to embrace that I really am a grown-up. That, I mean, people do see me. You write about, the shock when somebody calls you ma'am, at the grocery store, and you're like, what are you talking about? I'm 22. I don't know what you mean by this, and when people are, maybe not revering you, but seeing you as someone who's in those middle years, and it's shocking because it doesn't always align with how you feel on the inside. And so I think that willingness to embrace. I mean, when somebody calls me Mrs. Carr, it still throws me. I've been married, Lisa Jo, for almost 30 years, and I'm still like, Mrs. Carr, what?
I know. When all the little teenagers call me Mrs. Baker, I'm like, but wait, I'm your pal. Like,
yeah, exactly. What is going on?
Hanging out. Yeah. And then I realize I'm not. I'm just the person who provides the snacks and the ride.
Yeah, exactly. The carpooler. Okay, there's something I have to ask you about. It's a little bit of a squirrel trail, but I'm so fascinated. The cover of your book is so darling. The middle matters. Why that extraordinary life looks really good on you. And I'm looking at this cover and your big gorgeous smile, and I'm like, this girl, she's pointing to that subtitle on her t-shirt, Lisa Jo, why that extraordinary life looks good on you. And you have chipped nail polish. I was like, okay. Are you the freest person that I know? Like, talk to me about this.
First of all, I am so satisfied that you noticed that. It makes me laugh so hard. I always wondered if people would notice it. And the guy who designed the cover actually asked me, do you want me to Photoshop in your nail polish? He offered. And I said, no, don't touch it.
Yes.
And the women who were readers, it was a guy who offered to Photoshop it in. And the other women on my editorial staff said, no, don't touch it. So the story of the book cover is one of my favorite ones about the book. I love this cover so much because I feel like the cover picture matches up with the stories you'll find on the inside of the book, which are really photographs taken with words. They're snapshots of these completely ordinary moments that are just dripping with glory. And when we were talking about a book cover, the publisher had said, I think it'd be fun if you were on the cover, Lisa Jo, which once I got over the horror of that idea, they then said, we'll set up a professional shoot. We'll get a photographer in. They were planning the shoot. And that was so overwhelming for me to think about. I just thought, oh no, how do you get a charming look at a cover that's not staged? What does that look like? But in the interim, the designer said, could you just send me over a photograph of yourself, if you have one, as a placeholder as I'm thinking through the cover? So I sent him the picture that is now the cover of the book.
Oh, I love it.
The photograph, Julie, was taken on a cell phone by one of my best friends during my daughter's birthday party last year. I kid you not. It was never intended to be on a book. We were joking around outside. I had this t-shirt that had funny writing on it. We wanted to take a picture. She snapped them on her cell phone. And I'm laughing. You're catching me in the middle of my completely ordinary life in this photograph. We didn't Photoshop anything. I've got not perfect makeup. My hair is kind of like 3-day hair. I've got on my favorite t-shirt and my ratty jeans that have holes in them, not because they're distressed, but because they are just old. Okay? They're really old jeans. And at the time I had chippy nail polish. And so when they got this picture and they put it on the cover, the whole team said to me, would you mind if we went with this one? And I said, are you kidding me? Yes. A, I don't have to do a photo shoot. And B, this is who I actually am in 99% of my life. Sure, I like to have pretty nails as much as the next girl, but you know how it is. They don't last for very long, and then they're chippy for a while. And I think in the same way that I don't want us to be embarrassed by our failures or the fights in our marriage or our muffin top, I don't think we should be embarrassed by our chippy nail polish. And so my hope is women will see themselves in this picture and then find themselves in the essays inside, and in so doing have a new pair of lenses to look at their own lives.
Well, I absolutely love it. And as I told you, as somebody who identifies as an Enneagram 3-2 or a 2-3, it's like, oh, how do you get to the place of emotional health where you can have chipped nail polish on your book cover? Like, I love this girl.
I know. I said I felt like I was violating some kind of Southern ladies code by appearing in public with my chippy nail polish. But I just figured if I'm going to show up the realest version of who I am in my words, I might as well do it on the cover as well.
Well, it is fantastic. I can't wait for our listeners to get hold of this book, The Middle Matters, Why That Extraordinary Life Looks Really Good on You. You'll find Lisa Jo all over the grams, so be sure and tell her hi. And I want to hear from you too. I'm Julie Lyles Carr at all the places. Hey, be sure and check out our show notes. They're at AllMomDoes.com, and they feature extra content and all the links and sources for the things that we discussed during the episodes. I'll see you next time on the Modern Motherhood Podcast.